what the Department of Education has done. An atrocity. We should all storm the institution out of anger that this is the attitude that they've taken about our history. Not mine, ours. We should be storming the Capitol. Really, I'm serious. Because what the Department of Education has done is it's made excuses for not teaching our children the truth about this country, this soil that we're on now, and the labor that made their economies possible.
Hot off the press, hot off the press. If you've been following along with the Shenna Bellows, Donald Trump saga, then you will know that there is not that much coverage on what's going on here in Maine. And what coverage there is, it's recycled and repurposed. But just today, and I didn't even know about this, and I've been following along, and I live in the state of Maine, and I read the news all the time, didn't even hear about it myself. The impeachment process was overseen today at 10 a.m. in the House chamber. And as you will have just seen from that awkward, uncomfortable, possibly, I can't say that I word, but it was in before. Comment down below what you think. Was that a call to that I word? And that's my door. And you might be wondering what that has to do with Shenna Bellows and Donald Trump. Well, the thing is that Rachel Talbot Ross is now the main Speaker of the House. So she is the individual that oversaw the following procedure. So the individual with the gavel is Miss Rachel Talbot Ross, and she is the individual that somehow called for something worse than what Donald Trump called for, yet it was forgiven and overlooked and then forgotten about. Yet now she's overseeing the trial of someone that kicked the former president off of Maine's ballot because of her duty, and he wasn't even found, he wasn't tried, he wasn't found guilty of insurrection. He did not engage in an insurrection. January 6th is still up to debate as to what it comes down to. Some people say that it was one thing, other people say that it was a riot. That is still up for discussion. So if you've been following along, then you will want to know the conclusion of what happens. Well, spoiler alert, Shenna Bellows does not get impeached. But we could have seen that coming because Democrats run the state of Maine, essentially, at this point. So, come November, Mainers, y'all, we have got to vote differently. Because this shite cannot stand. And there's a lot of flowery words. People say some nice things about Shenna Bellows, but there is a whole lot that is said by opponents of Shenna Bellows that are on point, that demand further investigation. So I'm not going to follow up in this video, but I will have a follow-up video where I discuss, I review this video that we are about to watch together. So I will have a link from the video before, and I will also link the video that we are about to watch now. So let's get into this together.
The chair recognizes the representative from Paris, Representative Andrews.
I present a House order and move its passage, and further move that House Rule 524 be suspended for the purpose of voting on this House order without tabling it for one legislative day.
The representative from Paris, Representative Andrews, presents a House order and moves its passage, and further moves that House Rule 524 be suspended for the purpose of voting on this House order without tabling it one legislative day. The clerk will read the order.
Item 4-1 is House Order 34.
The representative from Paris, Representative Andrews, moves that further reading this House order be dispensed with the pleasure of the House. The chair recognizes the representative from Carmel, Representative Thorne.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm going to hold my comments pending the clerk's continued reading of the bill in the process.
Is it the pleasure of the House? It is a vote. Is it the pleasure of the House that House Rule 524 be suspended for the purpose of voting on this House order without tabling it one legislative day? It is a vote. The chair recognizes the representative from Carmel, Representative Thorne.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this House order. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows has done what no court in American history has done before. She's found someone guilty without a formal charge or court proceeding and issued her sentence. The sentence is to attempt to remove former President of the United States Donald Trump from the Maine presidential primary ballot. Secretary of State Bellows claims that it is her duty to do so. As state representative, I too swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Maine. Earlier this morning, in our opening prayer, we heard about cooperation, the spirit of collaboration, and working in friendship with each other. Madam Speaker, this decision that our Secretary of State has made does nothing but further divide the political banner between the parties and indeed the people of the state of Maine. By the power vested in me by the state of Maine and by the constituents that voted me to this office as state representative, I find the Secretary of State guilty of voter suppression. And I also find her guilty of suppression of free speech. This is a very serious matter. In a television interview, I heard our Secretary of State refer to what we are doing at this moment, impeachment proceedings of the Secretary of State, as political theater. Theater implies that there is an amusement, that there is entertainment value. I find neither entertainment value nor amusement from her decision to disenfranchise half of Maine's voters. Based on the feedback that I have received from colleagues, from the public, including Democrats and Independents and Green Party and Republicans, this is a very serious matter that cannot be taken lightly. And no impeachment process is ever a light matter. We take what is happening as very serious. The 5 people that brought forth charges, it was said was a bipartisan effort. Ironically, one of the Republicans, in name only, I will say, was referred to by a former chief executive of the state of Maine as being repugnant. The other supported a Democrat candidate for House of Representatives and went on TV supporting a Democrat governor. I would hardly call this bipartisan support. In closing, Madam Speaker, I would merely make the prediction that nothing will come of this other than our proceedings here today. And I would strongly urge the Secretary of State to use more caution going forward in her words, her tone, and her actions while claiming to represent the entire citizens of Maine. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the representative from Palermo, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too stand in support of the impeachment of the Secretary of State. I believe, and my constituents strongly believe, that she overstepped her duties when she declared Donald Trump unqualified to be on the presidential primary ballot. The Secretary of State has to look at 3 qualifications to put someone on the ballot. They must be over 35, they must have resided in the United States for 14 years, and they must be a citizen of the United States, as well as receiving the amount of signatures needed to be on the ballot. Donald Trump did meet all those criteria. She overstepped her bounds by listening to testimony that was so obscenely biased that it brought people to tears in that hearing which I sat through. There has been no crime, there has been no impeachment, there has been no conviction in a court of law. She is not a judge, she is not a jury, and I believe that the people feel absolutely disenfranchised and that she has done a great disservice to the state of Maine and to the opinion of how elections are run, and I believe that we must support this order. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the representative from Phillips, Representative Sobolewski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I'd like to start by putting forward an order code of ethics that was signed in February of 1989 by John R. McKernan, who was the governor. It's an order establishing a code of ethics and conduct for the executive branch of the Maine state government. Number 1, be guided by the highest standards of honor, personal integrity, and fortitude in all public activities in order to merit the respect of other officials, employees, and the public. Strive to inspire public confidence and trust in Maine state government and our institutions. I believe that the Secretary of State acted in the case of ultra vires, which is a Latin term in law which means exceeds the scope of one's authority. I was the only elected official that was in that hearing and had filed a letter of intervention to sit there and listen to what was going on. I listened to all 8 hours. The Secretary was cautioned repeatedly, Madam Secretary, respectfully, you do not have authority over the 14th Amendment, Section 3. Section 5 of the 14th Amendment clearly states that Congress has authority over the 14th Amendment. In 2020, Secretary Shenna Bellows was an elector in the Electoral College for Joseph R. Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Due to this fact, she cannot be considered by any rational standard an impartial arbiter of the hearing that she presided over. The hearing that ultimately, for her decree alone, barred Donald Trump from the 2024 presidential election against the 2020 candidate for whom she was an elector. Secretary Bellows should have done the ethical thing and publicly stated that in 2020, she was an elector for Joseph R. Biden and recused herself from this hearing. Instead, she remained presiding officer and unilaterally removed the 2020 Republican presidential candidate from the 2024 ballot. The 2020 Democrat candidate, Joseph R. Biden, who she was an elector for in the Electoral College, will be a candidate on the 2024 ballot in Maine. Due to the unilateral ruling in this hearing, under Biden elector Shenna Bellows, Joseph R. Biden will not have to face his former and biggest opponent, Donald J. Trump, on the Maine presidential ballot in November of 2024. What occurs to be an election interference of the highest order? It would seem that Secretary Bellows did not act ethically and instead did what was best for her preferred candidate and the Democrat Party instead of the voters of the state of Maine. She unilaterally disenfranchised at least 360,000 voters from their vote, their right to choose, both Republican and unenrolled independents. Donald J. Trump deserves to be on the ballot. He met the qualifications to be on the ballot, and I support this impeachment. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the representative from Brewer, Representative O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am a proud veteran, having served in the Maine Air National Guard for 24 years, which included my last tour in Iraq. When I entered the military, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Similarly, when I was sworn as a legislator, like everyone here, I also took an oath to carry out my duties in accordance with the Constitution. In my view, both of these oaths carry the same weight, and I take them both very seriously. Whether or not someone agrees with Secretary Bellows' decision is not what we are debating here today. What matters is that she was faithfully discharging her duties pursuant to the oath that she took to follow the law, which is an oath this body directed her to take. You might disagree with her decision, and some folks do, but every government official has an obligation to follow the law and fulfill their oath to the Constitution. That is what Secretary Bellows did. We should not punish her by removing her from office for simply doing her job. For these reasons, I will be voting against removing Secretary Bellows from her job. She did what was required of her in following the challenge proceedings as laid out in law. I hope everyone votes no on this order. Our Speaker is an honorable person. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our Secretary of State. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the representative from Auburn, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It was horrifyingly brought to my attention recently that I've been practicing law for 17 years. Over that time, I've practiced in federal trial courts, state trial courts, federal and state courts of appeals, countless state and federal agencies, county commissions, city councils, boards of selectmen, planning boards, and probably some venues I've forgotten about. I've received hundreds of opinions I've disagreed with, where the adjudicator misread a statute, acted outside their statutory authority, were affected by improper bias, and committed error of law. I've been annoyed, frustrated, and concerned. Not once, however, did I think impeachment was the proper remedy for my frustration or concern. Why? Two reasons. First, because no matter how terrible I thought a decision was, I understood that the person making the decision was simply making the decision they were charged to make by the lawmaking body. And second, because the beautiful thing about our legal system is that it affords numerous appeals and other mechanisms by which we can filter out erroneous decisions. This brings us to the resolution before us today. It seeks to impeach the Secretary of State for doing a job that our statutes say she, and only she, is required to do. This resolution is before us not because she did anything wrong, but because some of us don't like her decision. Title 21A MRS Section 337, which is a product of this lawmaking body, provides only one pathway for Maine voters to challenge a primary petition, and that is to the Secretary of State. Nobody else. It requires the Secretary of State and nobody else to hold a hearing within 7 days. It then requires the Secretary of State and nobody else to issue a decision within 5 days. If one is upset that the Secretary of State did all of these things, your quarrel is not with her. It's with the state legislature in 1985. If the process is so problematic and so scurrilous, I'd imagine that one of us could perhaps convince a state legislator to put in a bill that places the decision with somebody else. I think I know where I can find a state legislator who might do that. But sure, bills take time. So what of the current case? Well, in Maine, we have two wonderful procedural tools that make sure that incorrect adjudicatory decisions by administrative agencies are resolved. One is Maine Rule of Civil Procedure 80C, and the other is the Maine Administrative Procedures Act. Sorry, I was checking to see if I'd put my friend from Portland to sleep yet. These procedural mechanisms mean that any, and yes, that really means any, aggrieved party may petition the Superior Court for judicial review of the administrative decision. I've heard persistent cries that this issue belongs in front of a court. I agree. Guess what? It is. What are the courts looking at? Well, a Maine Rule of Civil Procedure 80C petition for judicial review asks the following questions: whether the Secretary of State's decision violated statute of the Maine or U.S. constitutions, whether the Secretary of State acted in excess of her statutory authority, whether the decision was made on unlawful procedure, whether her decision was affected by bias, whether she committed error of law, and whether there is sufficient factual information in the record to support her findings. All of the complaints I've heard thus far regarding the Secretary's decision are ones that will be, and actually have been forwarded by the former president in the proper venue, courts. If we are displeased that the first stop in the process was the Secretary of State, it's this body that can change that, not through impeachment, but through law. Those are the remedies: lawmaking and judicial adjudication that resolve the decisions with which we disagree, not impeachment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the representative from Wiscasset, Representative Polaworczyk.
Madam Speaker, here in Maine, we are no longer free to vote for whom we choose. I can't believe I just said that here in this chamber. Never in my wildest nightmares would I have dreamed that we here in Maine would be prevented from voting for the candidate of our choice. We have established requirements for candidates in our state. They are well defined so as to open the opportunity to anyone who is willing to be elected to serve our state. Creating additional requirements belongs with this legislature, not with the Secretary of State. Whether it stands or not does not change the fact that the Secretary of State has taken it upon herself to prevent us, the citizens of Maine, from voting for the candidate of their choice. That vote is fundamental to our being free. At the very least, the office of the Secretary of State has been tarnished. Is this action a violation of her oath of office? What has become of the sovereign state of Maine? Are we no longer required to follow the rule of law? Allegations are now convictions. Innocent until proven guilty has become guilty when accused. Due process is no longer allowed. The end justifies the mean is now the standard. We should not minimize the implications of her decision. What does my vote here today in this chamber mean? What does your vote mean? Here and now, each of us today will tell the people of Maine where we stand. Do we stand for the people's right to vote for the candidate of their choice? Do we agree with the Secretary of State has the authority to make that decision for us? If allowed to stand, we are no longer free. This decision is indicative of the direction our state is moving. For decades, we have watched our freedoms nibbled away. This is a big bite out of our rights. It tells the people of Maine they will no longer have a choice. They will vote as they are directed. The way life ought to be is changing. There even is a desire to change our flag that recognizes the symbol of that way of life. Has Maine had enough? Was this a step too far? The citizens of Maine will ultimately make that decision this November.
The chair recognizes the representative from Presque Isle, Representative Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If this decision is allowed to stand as far as keeping Trump off the ballot, and I myself recruited some signatures at a local polling place for signatures for Donald Trump, what's to say that the Secretary of State and I mean this seriously, each individual or some future Secretary of State will be able to say, I don't want you on the ballot, I don't want you on the ballot, or I don't want her on the ballot. And as far as I'm concerned, this is election interference, and it should be dealt with by removing the person who made the decision. There should be some accountability for removing him off the ballot, because she had no authority, regardless of what has been said from a prior speaker. I'd like to say that I worked hard to get the signatures that were needed to put Mr. Trump on the ballot in the state of Maine, and I like the idea that I worked my butt off for nothing. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the representative from Bangor, Representative Suppica.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before serving in the legislature, I applied for a job with the Secretary of State's office when it was under the leadership of Secretary Dunlap. And I was so nervous because my background was in customer service. I had been working for about a decade at a local bar in Bangor, and I often joke that the people in Bangor love their bartender so much they elected her to office. When I brought up my lack of experience to then Secretary Dunlap, he looked at me and he said, "You know what this resume says? It says you know how to work and you know how to work hard." And I'll never forget that. And that's what I found when I entered the Secretary of State's offices. Hardworking people who show up and got the job done. And I quickly realized how much customer service government employees actually do. Those customer service skills were put to good work, especially when dealing with the public or with maybe more high-maintenance folks like members of the legislature. After being elected to this body, I continued to hold that standard for service to the people of Maine in high regard. And now, as a member of the legislature, and as the chair, House Chair of the Veteran and Legal Affairs Committee, I've had the pleasure of working with the Secretary of State's offices from the other side. I've seen Secretary Bellows show up to committee meetings on time again and again, facing extremely challenging materials, personalities, and questions, and still she continues to deliver thoughtful and transparent responses. It is through this lens that I have gained an even deeper appreciation for the Secretary's work ethic and commitment to service. When Secretary Bellows was sworn into office to her first term in 2021, she was the first female Secretary of State in Maine's history. And it is not lost on me that the scrutiny she receives is different than what her male predecessors were subjected to. And in this hyper-political environment, that scrutiny has a powerful effect. Now, we find ourselves dealing with the orders before us, challenging the Secretary's integrity, and initiating her impeachment. And I want to make one thing clear. Issuing a ruling on the bipartisan petition to disqualify former President Trump was required by Secretary Bellows by law, a law that this body put in place regardless if I agree or disagree with her ruling. Her authority to rule on this matter is well-founded and is not grounds for her impeachment. The Secretary's body of work goes so far beyond this decision, and when considering an action as consequential as impeachment, I think it's critical that we take the full picture into account. Throughout her time in office, she has gone above and beyond to carry out her duties with integrity and professionalism, often working across the aisle to ensure our democracy is strong. She is a proven record as a public servant who stands up for free and fair elections. Last session, we saw her work hard for the nonpartisan election officials. She advocated for a bipartisan compromise that extended the period of time that these nonpartisan election officials have to count ballots without having to work under unreasonable amounts of pressure and time constraints. Because you know what doesn't keep our elections fair and safe? Overworked, burnt-out staff. This resolution, which came from one of my Republican colleagues, really strengthened our nonpartisan election work, especially during big general election years. Additionally, over the past few years, the Secretary's office has continued expanding transparency by live streaming to the public key election processes. Some of those included election recounts, the rollout of ranked choice voting in Maine, and when deciding on the order of the 8 referendum questions that appeared on the ballot in 2023 to ensure that they weren't fairly listed. These are great examples we can all hold up of what our Secretary of State's office in Maine is doing, how we are going beyond what was the norm to ensure that the public is tuned in and understands the often confusing and sometimes mundane elements of our election work. In the legislature, we are so close to the fire. I often think we forget that the minute details that matter are easily overlooked by folks who don't do this work day in and day out. So having an opportunity for the public to witness election processes in real time is an invaluable opportunity for education, because fundamentally the goal of the Secretary's office isn't to keep people from voting, either from fear or ignorance, but to expand our already safe and secure elections and to help ensure more voters are equipped with the tools they need to make their voices heard. Secretary Bellows has worked tirelessly to that end. We often talk about politics. We often envision an extremely contentious partisan environment. But at the end of the day, it's just people showing up trying to do their jobs, doing the work. Some of it's tedious, but it's all part of the checks and balances that makes this democracy work. And Secretary Bellows is a public servant working as part of a larger institution designed to protect our most basic freedoms. And I believe she is doing right by that institution and by the people of Maine. So please, Madam Speaker, join me in voting against this order.
The chair recognizes the representative from Guilford, Representative White.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just thought it would be helpful if I read aloud the 14th Amendment's Section 5. The Congress shall have power to enforce, by appropriate legislation, the provisions of this article. Congress alone has that power by legislation. There has been no legislation passed, even with an accusation of anything that would prohibit someone from being on the ballot. And certainly we can't utilize someone else's authority if we go down the path where anyone who's taken this oath, the oath that I've taken multiple times since I was 18 years old, that if someone else has authority, I can take that authority and rule on that authority and then take action under that authority. We're going down a very scary road. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the representative from Phillips, Representative Sobolewski.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My distinguished colleague mentioned earlier that the Secretary had 5 days in order to make her decision, and that date was set for the 22nd at 5 p.m. When the 22nd came, the Secretary delayed that decision due to the storm. I believe it was something that was a little different than that. In order to be a declared write-in candidate on a ballot in the state of Maine, you need to file the declaration with the Secretary of State's office 70 days prior to the election itself. That put that date on December 26th. The Secretary delayed her decision until December 29th, thereby denying President Trump the right to be on the ballot for a second time, this time as a write-in candidate. I'd like to remind everybody about 14.3. 14.3 states shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion. Donald Trump was convicted of neither. He's an innocent man in this. And thank you to my colleague for reading Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. The Congress has the jurisdiction over 14, not the Secretary of State. She wasn't doing her job. She stepped past her job, past her authority, and made a decision she was not entitled to. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the representative from Auburn, Representative Libby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I appreciate the brevity that we are granted by
moving to dispense with the readings of many of our bills, and including this order. But I think in this case that does a disservice as we contemplate this issue. So I'd like to read a portion of this order and summarize other pieces of it. Whereas grave and serious allegations have been raised regarding the conduct of Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, now therefore be it ordered that the House Special Investigative Committee is established to investigate allegations of misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, and other misconduct by Secretary of State Shenna Bellows, and to submit its findings and recommendations to the full House of Representatives as to whether cause exists for impeachment. The committee shall conduct a comprehensive review of allegations of misconduct by Secretary of State Shenna Bellows regarding her actions in and after the adjudicatory proceeding in disqualifying Donald J. Trump from inclusion on the state's primary election ballot, including the failure to recuse herself for bias from that adjudicatory proceeding as required by the Maine Administrative Procedure Act. Moving down, it outlines who would be part of that House Special Investigative Committee. It orders the rules that should be adopted. It orders how oaths should be administered and how the proceedings should go with that House Special Investigative Committee. I appreciate the words of the good representative from Auburn that whether President Trump is on the ballot or not, he will have remedy through the courts. What we are talking about here is a distinct and separate issue. What we are talking about here today are the allegations against Secretary of State Shenna Bellows. That is a separate and distinct issue, and it is an issue which the Constitution of Maine, Article 4, Part 1st, Section 8, vests solely in the Maine House of Representatives. I agree with the good representative from Bangor that it's important that we take a look at the full picture as we consider that separate and distinct issue of the allegations raised against Secretary of State Shenna Bellows. And I'd like to clarify that voting in support of this order is not voting in support of impeachment of Secretary of State Shenna Bellows. It is voting in support of following the process and determining through the House Special Investigative Committee as to whether cause exists for impeachment. Just as the courts are doing their duty regarding whether Trump will be on the ballot or not, let's do our duty in the House in handling the allegations raised against Secretary of State Shenna Bellows. We are not trying impeachment in the House of Representatives today. The Senate, as outlined in the Constitution of Maine, Article 4, Part 1st, Section 7, vests that power in the Senate. Secretary of State Shenna Bellows is not being tried in the House today, Madam Speaker. That power is only in the Senate. The question here today is whether the House Special Investigative Committee should be established to investigate this separate and distinct issue apart from whether Trump should be on the ballot or not. I ask my colleagues in the House on both sides of the aisle to please support this order so that we can move forward and investigate the issue as it should be with all full due diligence.
The chair recognizes the representative from Gorham, Representative Terry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speakers and members of the House, I rise right now in opposition to the pending motion before us. As the representative from Auburn stated earlier, Maine law could not be more clear. The Secretary of State is provided the sole authority to determine the validity of a political candidate's primary positions. So when a bipartisan challenge was brought forward questioning the validity of the candidate Trump's eligibility to appear on the primary ballot in our state, Secretary Bellows was bound by law to consider its merits, just as anyone else holding that office would be too. Then she initiated with full transparency the appeals process as required by state law, which included a series of public hearings in which each side was given the opportunity to present arguments against and for the petition. Then she issued a decision based on the merits of these arguments. Having worked with her, I have complete confidence that Secretary Bellows is in full understanding of the law. The principles that matter, and I am certain that she did not reach this conclusion lightly. Whether or not someone agrees with the outcome of her decision is not what we're debating today. Throughout the entire process, Secretary Bellows consistently followed the protocols outlawed in Maine law. In order to faithfully discharge the duties of her office, uphold her oath, she was required to make a decision, a difficult decision. Simply making this decision, while it might not be popular for some, does not constitute engaging in partisan politics. And most importantly, does not meet the high thresholds for impeachment as outlined in the Maine Constitution. Additionally, Secretary Bellows placed a stay on her own decision, ensuring the opportunity for judicial review. If some members of this body disagree with the current petition process, there are avenues to change that, including by submitting legislation to do so in the next legislature. This impeachment effort is not an appropriate course of action. The ability to initiate an impeachment against a constitutional officer is a solemn responsibility given to this body, one that is not to be taken lightly or hastily. Her actions do not constitute sufficient grounds to remove her from office, and for that reason, I will vote against the pending motion, and Madam Speaker, I request a roll call.
The representative from Gorham, Representative Terry, has requested a roll call. In order for the chair to order a roll call, it must have the express desire of 1/5 of the members present. All those desiring a roll call, please signify in the usual manner. A sufficient number having requested a roll call is in order. The pending question is the passage of House Order 34. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor will vote yes. Those who oppose will vote no. The chair will open the vote. The Sergeant at Arms will secure the chamber. Have all now voted? The chair will close the vote. The clerk will run the total. The chair will announce the vote. 60 having voted in the affirmative, 80 having voted in the negative. The motion fails. Is there objection to all matters having been acted upon being sent forthwith? Hearing none, ordered sent forthwith.
Thanks for staying tuned. That was a long video, but sometimes that's how democracy works. We don't want to be making decisions without hearing all the sides, without considering all the aspects, implications, and consequences. So the length of the video can't be helped, but if you've made it this far, go ahead and leave a mountain emoji here and let me know that you have watched this video all the way through, and then go ahead and comment down below. If you found anything of worth, of value from this video, please go ahead and share it with friends and family. Let's get this information out there and let's keep democracy rolling, because this is democracy. Us discussing, us rebutting, us challenging each other, that is democracy. Freedom isn't always pretty, but it is necessary in a first world civilized society. I've been Drew Hoagland. I am the host of Mainstream Current, and until next time, have a great day.